I don't think you need any specific skills, right? Unfortunately, research has always been.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into D Industry. So in this episode, we have a really special guest with us. Hi Nikita, welcome to D Industry.
Thank you for having me over.
So how was your day, Nikita?
It was pretty nice considering it's Saturday. I had a late morning for a change.
Cool. So if you could give a brief about yourself to our viewers out there.
Sure. So, hey folks, I'm Nikita. I'm a user researcher and I work at Microsoft. At Microsoft, I am the only researcher for a few touch points of Outlook, which consist of Outlook on the mobile web. We have Outlook browser extension. We have Outlook on the edge right hand side pane. We recently launched Outlook Lite and we also have Outlook on iOS. So those are all the products I take care of. Before Microsoft, I used to work for Flipkart and a couple of agencies. I have my master's in design from Glasgow School of Art and I'm originally a mechanical engineer.
That's wonderful, Nikita. So we are quite excited to know your journey from being a mechanical engineer to a researcher at Microsoft. So could you please walk us through your journey from all the way where you started?
Sure. So I'm originally from Pune, and I think like everyone does, right? Engineering is sort of an incubation to then understand where you want to go. So like everyone, I got into engineering, but I really loved the mechanical side of things because you can do a lot more physical things in mechanical design than everything else, right? So I used to love using lathe machine, forging, things like that. But then eventually I realized that engineering is quite monotonous, right? Where I would have like a bunch of formulas that I would have to use the rest of my life. And I didn't really want that. So that's when I started exploring design. I also, because being from Pune, I had never really ventured out of my hometown. So instead of just venturing out in India itself, I decided, oh, why not? Let's go to UK. So that's where I started looking for colleges in UK and Europe. And I decided on Glasgow School of Art. So the master's program is actually an amalgamation of engineering as well as design. So it's sort of divided between the Glasgow School of Art and University of Glasgow, where I would have both design and engineering subjects. So yes, that's where my research journey started. One of my first electives was user-centered research for design. And a lot of projects that we had were around observation. It was so different than what I had studied before, right? So that sort of intrigued my mind, and that's where my research journey started.
So, any tips to the beginners that you want to suggest who want to shift out from engineering backgrounds to research and what it needs for the young minds to claim themselves as a researcher?
I don't think you need any specific skills, right? Unfortunately, research has always been a career where you learn on the job than education. You don't really have great universities or courses, right, which teach on research, unfortunately. So I would say get in early anywhere you want to go. The great way to sort of start into research is maybe joining an agency because you work with multiple clients, you get an overview of multiple industries, multiple methods. So it really helps you upskill yourself much faster than what you would in a product company. So I think joining an agency is a great way to go. If you also want to do maybe a course in design to understand the design or UX side of things, that also really helps move up your career. So I would say those would be the perfect way to get into research.
Thanks, Nikita. So, I wanted to understand from your perspective, like you have studied internationally and then you have moved back to India and then chose to be a researcher. So, how was your lateral shift towards all this different sides that you have tried out?
When I went to UK, I didn't really have it in mind that, oh, I wanted to settle there or I wanted to get a job there. For me, the important thing was to move from engineering to design, right? And this course sort of gave me a best of both worlds to then decide whether I wanted to continue with either one. So that was my main goal. And I came back right away after my master's. I think after coming back, I did have to spend like 5 odd months finding a job, but I eventually landed one And fortunately, my first job itself was in research. So I didn't have to do like design and then research and get into research.
Thanks, Nikita. So if you could share with us, how was your journey right from an agency to the Microsoft? What are the different learning?
I think agency is a great place to learn about research, right? Get an in-depth understanding of what are the skills and what are the methods are out there. So you would be working with multiple clients across various companies, across various industries and various different scopes of research as well. Learning from an agency was more around just upscaling yourself, right? Most of the clients that are there do not have a research function in India, or they themselves are not in India, but India is their user base, so they would want to do in-depth research as well as more exploratory research with us as well, right? And then once, but it is limiting to some point, considering everything is already decided for you, not from method to research design to even what questions do you need to be asked, have sometimes been dictated by the client. So it can be limiting. And I wanted to eventually get to a place where I take those decisions. So that's why I ventured out from both the companies that I worked with. Then I joined Flipkart, and Flipkart was more about stakeholder management, considering I had never really worked with a team, right? So I had my stakeholders from design and product, understanding the scope of the study, the need, the kind of questions do they want to answer, and also being autonomous enough to make those decisions, right? So from relying on someone to make those decisions from me, to going to a place where I take those decisions and I decide how to run my research, sort of help me by being in a product company. And now at Microsoft, I have additional stakeholders like engineers, right? And that's another battle because engineers don't really know a lot about what research is and what research can be done. So it's also about how can I involve them in my process and also bring that empathy towards them.
That's a wonderful point you have mentioned, Nikita, that working out with engineers. So a lot of designers and researchers in an agency most of the times doesn't get this exposure of working out with
Yep.
engineers on a one product for a longer basis. So if you could
Yep.
share with us few tips on how to build that empathy with engineers and how to collaborate with them to get the best desired output.
I think research has always been considered a black box, right? So it's about opening it up and also understanding that these stakeholders may not know anything about research. So when I joined Microsoft, I started with conducting a few brown bags for them, just very basic understanding of what is research, what does research do, where does it come in the product process, and what kind of questions can be answered. But it didn't end there. I also invited them to attend my research sessions, right? So usually what I'll do is I'll add them to the meeting invite, I'll share a note taking sheet, and I'll actually make them take notes so that they are actively listening than just passively being there, right? So taking notes sort of started the whole process of them being intrigued to now being very, very user focused. So it's about involving them in your process and seeing how can you make the experience more meaningful for them.
That's a very absolute crisp answer, Nikita. So, wanted to understand from your perspective, like we often get to hear people that you have to read a lot, you have to go through tons and tons of people's interviews and all to get into the proper distilled research outputs and all. So, what's your take on that being worked in industry for a while? Is that really something that people should be worried of, or how to get over that fear?
You don't necessarily need to read a lot, right? It's about working smart and working hard. So even when I am conducting my desk research, I'm very selective on the kinds of things I read. So one tip would be just read the initial bit, right? Understand what is that document about before going in deep, because once you start going in deep, you can get lost and you don't know where to start, right? So be very selective on how to do it. But when you do interviews, right, one of the tips that I do is take really holistic notes and make them much more crisp, right? And you can have all of your team take notes. So for example, one designer, one PM, one engineer, all three would have their own perspective of writing notes, and that essentially can be plugged into your analysis. You don't really need to go through transcripts after transcripts, right? When you have those notes, you would already have highlighted the main things, and it's just about analyzing those. So I think it's about getting those unique perspectives from each of the stakeholders, right? For example, design would have very much their perspectives around how people are finding that need, versus the product might think about how can we actually create a product for these users. So that's very product centric point of view. Engineers might be looking at, oh, how is their phone, is it a low end, how is their screen, how are they working around it. So each one would have their own perspectives, and putting them together, you would sort of come up a bigger holistic picture, right?
Thank you so much, Nikita. So, wanted to understand from your side, what are the effective storytelling skills that you implement to convey the narrative to a larger stakeholders?
I always look at the story from the user angle. So the user can be anyone, right? It can be your actual target segment. The user can be me. The user can be the designer or the engineer. So depending upon whom I am giving the presentation, I would sort of narrate that story from their way. Normally, having the target segment user works the best, where you could say that, oh, we have this person from, for example, Mumbai. He lives in this family. This is how his daily life looks at, this is how he uses his phone, and so on. And then sort of start going into depth of what are the problems that the person has. So now you then understand that, oh, this is the person, and you can relate to that person much more than just stating a random insight out of nowhere. I feel that having that user centricity even in presentations works much better.
That's wonderful. So, Nikita, if you could share with us, how does your typical day look like as a researcher at Microsoft?
So I have two different days that I would like to sort of tell you, right? One day is when I'm doing research, and then the other day is when I'm not doing research. So on the day when I'm doing research, I would usually have interviews or sessions lined up the whole day. I would typically have 3 to 4 sessions the whole day, and with some gaps to sort of do a quick analysis after the session. So I would get up, get on a call. Usually, most of my research is remotely, so I don't really have to go anywhere, fortunately. So I would do the sessions, I'll have a quick debrief with my team, put my notes together, and sort of end my day the same way. The days when I am not conducting research, I am actually reading or scoping out a particular project, or I'm analyzing a particular research, or just talking to my stakeholders, right, and understanding what more can we do. So the other part of my life is actually a lot about stakeholder management than actually research, right? Researchers are thought about how can they be the tools of bringing empathy, but what I feel is researchers are thought leaders, right? We know the user understanding, we know the product understanding, we also know the design understanding, right? And how can we sort of amalgamate all that data and give the right direction than anything else. So yes, that is where I'm focusing on most of the time than conducting research.
That's wonderful, Nikita. So, before we conclude into our episode, wanted to know from you the most asked question from our viewers. What does a researcher's portfolio look like? And how does researchers build their portfolio?
Researchers' portfolio is essentially case studies of research that you have done, right? For example, even if you are a designer, each project of yours would have research. So it's about dialing down into it. Typically, I recommend have not more than 3 projects per portfolio, but have a very consistent process across, right? So you could start off with what were the research questions or hypotheses that you started with. How did you actually design the research, which means defining the method, the kind of target segment that you go after. Post that, you could detail down a little bit about how did you conduct research, right? And it's also about adding what are the things that didn't go well. I think adding that is really important because it shows how did you actually problem solve and complete the research. Then it's also about talking about how to do the analysis. Different people do it different ways. You have different types of doing analysis as well, right? You have affinity mapping, you have thematic analysis. So how do you do that? And finally, what were the insights? But the most important thing is also showing the impact of your insights, right? It may not be a metric. It may not be like, oh, my insight got taken up and this is how the conversion was. It can be as minute as my research recommendation was this, and this is how it translated into design. So impact and the process are the two main things that sort of sum up your portfolio.
Very well explained, Nikita. Thank you so much. So every time we conclude this show, we ask the fellow designer or researcher the top 5 lessons that they have learned throughout their journey that they can share out with our viewers out there.
Wow, that's a difficult one. I can share 3, maybe 5.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Anything
Shall I
that
go?
you have in mind. Yes, please.
Yes, I think the first one that was when I learned during my agency days is always under promise and over deliver. And it actually works as a charm because the person in front of you is not expecting a lot, but then when you give that little bit more, the person is honestly very surprised, right? That, oh, where did this come from? And it helps in your career growth as well, because then you are showing that you're consistently outperforming, and that works really well. The second one is also working smart, considering researchers always have a lot of work on them, right? And the number of researchers are always going to be less than the stakeholders. So how do you actually prioritize and prioritize ruthlessly? This is the thing that I learned both at Flipkart and Microsoft, that being a solo researcher for multiple touch points or multiple products, it can become very daunting. And having a proper prioritization framework to handle your work works really well. And then the third one is also taking an off time, right? Work life balance is essentially very important. And if you keep hustling, you are going to have that burnout, and you are going to lose that affinity that you have with your career. I think taking periodical breaks or going for a holiday or doing anything that you like doing, you should actually continue doing that every day or at least most of the week, because that is going to give you enough fuel to do well in your career as well.
Wonderful, Nikita. Thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful insights and your inspirational journey. We're looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was amazing.